Our first guest tonight here to discuss the president's warning to the Republican Party about the cost of failure in the case of health care legislation and whether the Republican leadership is in fact capable of moving the president's ambitious legislative agenda forward. Joining us tonight, Kellyanne Conway, counselor to the president from the White House. Kellyanne, first of all, thank you for being with us tonight. And secondly, what are the prospects as we talk here right now of health care actually becoming a reality in the Senate?
We remain very optimistic that the president will have a bill on his desk in short course from the Senate and the House, of course, which passed it several weeks ago. Lou, why? Well, because all these senators ran on repealing and replacing Obamacare, and they've seen all the numbers. Let's remember why we're doing this in the first place. We have 19 of the 23 co-ops have failed. 83 insurers left the exchanges already, with 24 more promising to do so. In Senator Heller's Nevada, 2 more just pull out of the exchanges. You've got bare counties there that literally have no way for people to access private insurers in their counties.
There seems to be a divide between Mitch McConnell and the president himself on this right now. They do not seem to be working together, to those of us on the outside looking in. Mitch McConnell doesn't seem to be necessarily moving forward the president's bill, nor Paul Ryan, as he moved forward in the Senate, which he couldn't have done, admittedly, without the president driving that legislation. We don't see the same animation. Is it there on the part of the president this time in the Senate?
It is. He just had the Republican senators all here 2 days ago. No, but that was an important point. If the president himself and the vice president himself were not engaged in this process, they would just leave it to the Senate and say, look, when you guys on Capitol Hill are finished, put it on my desk, we'll take a look at it, and I'll let you know. That's not Donald Trump's way, and that's not what he's been doing with health care legislation. Even HHS and CMS and other agencies have been giving giving technical assistance. The president himself has been working the phones. The vice president has had half a dozen at least today and yesterday individual meetings with senators.
To report here tonight?
Yes, and remember the president said there'll be a big surprise. If I told you what that was, it wouldn't be a surprise. But the whole point of that is that there are negotiations and discussions and different options on the table to make this better and make it workable. I can tell you that this White House feels optimistic that the process is moving forward and that we'll have a bill in front of the president this summer, followed by tax reform to come.
All right. Terrific. Well, we do know one thing. The House today passing the president's bills that he supported, Kate's Law, and no sanctuary for criminals. However, they have dim prospects in the Senate. What can the president do about that?
We should be very excited that this passed, that you got a president in just 5 months on the job, Lou, who actually engineered and made sure, showed leadership that this action would be taken. Action was the word that was used yesterday by a woman who came to this White House and sat with the president in the cabinet room and told her story, she and her husband, about their son. And he was murdered by an illegal alien who had multiple felony convictions. We heard from Jamil Shaw Sr., Laura Wilkinson, Marianne Mendoza.
I've been working on the issue of illegal immigration in this country for a very long time. What I'm really asking you, on behalf of the people in this country who voted for the president and who want to see a very, very vigorous enforcement of U.S. immigration law and enforcement of border security, also these 2 bills, is there any possibility that they'll pass in the Senate?
Yes, there's a possibility, but at first he has to have the people here to show everyone why we're doing this. What is the point of this? What is the urgency? What is the action needs to be taken? Then today the House took the action, and I'm sure that your viewers are well aware. But why the no funding for sanctuary cities? Oh, because you need to comply with basic federal laws to be able to get these DOJ and DHS grants. And Kate Steinle should be a household name. Thank you very much for making her one on your show, because she is one of many whose lives have been snuffed out by people who should not have been here. The man who murdered her in front of her father a couple of years ago had been deported 5 times and had about 7 felony convictions. So going to the Senate, I want all the senators to pay attention to why this is happening and recognize we don't give federal funds to cities that call themselves sanctuary cities that are harboring illegal aliens and getting money from DOJ and DHS anyway. So I'd like those senators to really meet these families, to watch your show, to listen to the president, to find out what the point of this really is.
Kellyanne, I want to say, in addition, congratulations on moving both of those bills in the House. Also, the travel ban going into effect in less than an hour. Again, a terrific win for President Trump and for the country.
It is indeed.
A few thoughts now on what has been a top priority for President Trump: cracking down on illegal immigration, criminal illegal immigrants in sanctuary cities that harbor them. Department of Homeland Security Secretary John Kelly offered some strong words today for opponents of the president's policies and priorities. General Kelly slammed lawmakers for choosing politics over public safety.
DHS does not make the laws, Congress does, and we will enforce the laws that are passed by Congress. And I am offended when members of this institution exert pressure and often threaten me and my officers to ignore the laws they make and I am sworn to uphold.
Did you notice Speaker Ryan behind Secretary Kelly? Well, Secretary Kelly's comments coming at a press conference alongside Ryan. Of course, House Republicans have been slow to act on immigration reform. Despite passing both Kate's law and the No Sanctuary for Criminals Act today, there is zero chance they'll be passed in the Senate. The bills head to the Senate, nonetheless, where they won't pass, in part because they require 60 votes each. And make no mistake about it, the Republican majority leader in the Senate could change that rule to a simple majority with the snap of his fingers. But Democratic obstructionists as well are blocking a vote in the Senate. Last July, they blocked a vote on Kate's law. President Trump has vowed to be the law and order president. In 5 months, he's done much to earn exactly that title. He's called for a crackdown on illegal immigration, a secure border. And now the items on the president's agenda are stacking up in quick and high order for the Senate, raising lots of questions that only Majority Leader McConnell can answer. Is he or is he not up to the job of leader, or is he another political hack mediocrity sitting in the arguably the most important job on Capitol Hill? It is time for Republican leadership to deliver for this president on illegal immigration, on health care, on tax reform, on every issue this president campaigned for. Issues that matter greatly to all Americans. And like the wall the president promised, critical to securing our nation and the safety of all Americans. Joining me now, author of the new bestseller, The Swamp, Washington's Murky Pool of Corruption and Cronyism and How Trump Can Drain It. Co-host of the Fox News Specialist, Eric Bolling. Good to have you here.
Good to be here, Lou. Great to join us.
Congratulations on the show first, and
thank
the new book.
And you as well.
And you as well. Thank you. The Swamp. I said tonight earlier, I don't see the swamp getting drained today.
Well, maybe not today, but so people say, well, I thought he was going to drain the swamp when he got to D.C. You know, I wrote the book because I was watching Trump with that visceral reaction with people in those massive events that he would throw, 50,000 people, and they would yell, lock her up and drain the swamp. And I'm like, wow, what does he have in store? He's going to win, and what does he have in store for him when he gets to the swamp? Started doing some research, and the swamp is murkier and deeper and worse than I ever thought, and I'm sure it was worse than he thought. So I think what he's done is really brilliant. He took the first 5 or 6 months, and he built up a lot of political currency. You're familiar with that. He had wins on the economy. He had wins on the temporary travel ban.
No president has ever done more in the first 5 months of their administration.
Repealing all those
38 pieces of legislation.
All those Obamacare regulations that roll back, and look at the economy's off the charts, popping up 17 or 18% since he was elected. So he builds up all this political currency, and then he can start working on some of the other initiatives. I will say, I think the one mistake, and I'm very pro-Trump, one mistake he made was listening to Paul Ryan and House leadership saying, we have a bill for you that we can get passed, a health care bill. And he said, oh, you do? Okay, then let's do this.
What about listening to Mitch McConnell right now?
Yeah, I think this is a mistake. But again, what people need to understand is these bills aren't White House bills. This is a House.
No, they get that.
A House
but
bill
you know what?
and a Senate bill.
Just like Obamacare is Obamacare, because President Obama was in the White House, whatever comes out of here is going to have his brand on it, whether he likes it or not.
Right.
And what they're serving up is not up to Trump standards, I would put it that way.
It's not up to our standards either, I would think. You wait and you don't rush something through. I personally think you push it aside. I know. Push it aside for now. You may have a little bit of a hard time in 2018. You'll have a worse time in 2018 if you give people Obamacare worse than Obamacare, because we're going to have premiums rise into 2018.
Yeah, I just think that President Trump had it right. This thing is an albatross. Obamacare is an albatross around the neck of the Democratic Party, and it's a very
so why do you lift
touchy thing.
Why do you lift that albatross?
Yeah, especially when
leave it on.
Yeah, but look at that. You and I agreeing on this. I'll tell you what.
For a while.
Your book is The Swamp, Drain the. I love it. And by the way, I like that pose you got there. Let's do that. I was going to
do a nice smiley one or not. I was like, no.
Yeah, I like that. Serious. Kick ass in the swamp. All right.
Drain it.
You got it.
Thanks, Lou.
Thank you, Eric. Good luck, and I appreciate it. We're coming right back with a lot more, I'm troubled to tell you. Stay with us for all of that. The Trump administration today defended its revised extreme vetting order in front of the left-wing Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, a three-judge panel there. All of them, of course, appointed by Bill Clinton, giving a fair hearing to the issue. President Trump has said he is considering breaking up the Ninth Circuit, vowing to return conservatives to that circuit court. And I say, well, the sooner the better. Republicans, by the way, currently control 32 state legislatures. They hold 33 governorships, controlling both the House and the Senate. I mean, we're talking about historic Republican control of state legislatures, state houses, and governorships. Yet, 67% of federal appellate court judges are appointed by Democratic presidents. 2/3. Joining me now to talk about the left-wing judiciary and the deep state judiciary in many cases and their attempts to block President Trump and the Supreme Court decision not to review North Carolina's voter ID law today. Hans von Spakovsky, he's Senior Legal Fellow at Heritage Foundation Center for Legal and Judicial Studies. Hans, great to have you with us. You know, this is preposterous to sit there and listen to, as we did today, the arguments before the three-judge panel. It's a kangaroo court, the Ninth Circuit Court, no matter how you cut it, isn't it?
Yeah, 80% of the decisions that are appealed and accepted by the U.S. Supreme Court of the Ninth Circuit are overturned. And often the court adopts the dissenting opinions written by the small number of conservative judges that are on the court. Well,
as we look at it, what do you think is going to happen? I mean, is this an automatic turn to the Supreme Court? Are we just wasting time here at the Ninth Circuit Court level?
I'm afraid that's true. Remember, this case has already been to the Ninth Circuit with the original executive order, and there the three judges totally ignored the law. I mean, if they had followed the actual law and prior precedents, including the Supreme Court, they would have thrown out the lawsuits against the Trump administration. I'm afraid we're going to get the same kind of result with this revised order, so it is going to end up in the Supreme Court. What I hope happens there is finally the Supreme Court, I hope, will stomp on all of these lawsuits that are going on all over the country.
Yeah, and pure obstructionism on the part of the Dems, and the left, and the left-wing judiciary, the deep state judiciary, trying to preserve the status quo. The decision by Chief Justice Roberts, waving his hand and saying we can't really figure out what the standing is to decide or to hear even the North Carolina voter ID law. I have to say, don't know a thing about law, but I got some acquaintanceship with just common sense, and this is getting to be silly on the part of this court.
Well, yeah, although I got to say, in a little bit of defense of the Chief Justice, that actually what happened with this case was procedural chaos. And what I mean by that is you have a fight going on down in North Carolina between the legislature, which filed the appeal.
The Assembly.
Right, the Assembly. But in November, a new Democratic Attorney General was elected, and he went to the Supreme Court and said, oh, I'm withdrawing the appeal. The legislature said, you can't do that. You're violating North Carolina law and North Carolina ethics rules. And so what the Supreme Court basically said today was, look, we're not going to accept this for review because it's unclear whether the case is really before us or not because of this fight down in the state.
Yeah, well, it's sort of interesting that the Chief Justice has the sufficient intellect to decide that a fine is a tax, as he did in the case of Obamacare, but can't figure out whether the Assembly of North Carolina or a newly elected Democratic Attorney General has standing. I'm thinking he can do better than this on both counts.
Well, look, I agree. This decision by the lower Fourth Circuit was really just a terrible decision. It wasn't justified by the facts or the law. And
Are we ever, Hans, going to get voter ID and electoral integrity in this country, or are we consigned to forever this ridiculous, absurdist exercise in denying reality?
I actually think as time goes by, things are going to get better because actually most of the challenges against voter ID laws have failed. It's just that the few times the challengers win, like in this North Carolina case, that's when your favorite newspapers, the Washington Post and New York Times, give them tremendous publicity. They don't like publishing it when the challengers to voter ID laws lose, which has happened most of the time.
And I hate it worse when it's treated like standing law. And that's what we're looking at. Hans, thanks for being with us. We appreciate it. Hans,
sure, anytime.
Von Spakovsky, as always, educating us. Be sure to vote in tonight's poll. The question is, do you believe it's impossible to get a fair trial in this partisan age? You remember when partisanship didn't matter so much? It's everything now, isn't it? Cast your vote on Twitter at Lou Dobbs. Follow me on Twitter at Lou Dobbs. Like me on Facebook. Follow me on Instagram at Lou Dobbs tonight. On Wall Street, a record-breaking day for stocks. That's right, a record-breaking day for stocks. Man, isn't that interesting? Donald Trump's election, and look what's happening in business and markets. The economy is moving. Jobs are being created. But I digress. The Dow Jones Industrial's up 85 points, the S&P up 11, the NASDAQ up 28, both closing at new all-time highs. Volume on the big board today, 3.4 billion shares. Confidence among home builders climbing as well, hitting the highest level since December. A reminder to listen to my reports 3 times a day, coast to coast on the Salem Radio Network. I said I digress from the important things like Chuck Schumer and his heartfelt concerns and fears over the firing of an FBI director. I want to take a moment, just a little silence. There, that's enough. Up next, former Defense Secretary Gates endorsing Trump's approach in governance.
The disruptive nature, the tough talk on North Korea, the military deployments, sending the missile defense system to South Korea. I think these are all good things to have done. And I think he's gotten China's attention to a degree that his predecessors have not. That this is a very serious matter for the United States.
President Trump defended by someone who was once one of his fiercest critics. Bob Gates defending the president and his policies. I take that up in my commentary here next. Stay with us. A few thoughts now on the Dems' partisan hysteria and a left-wing media that's in full attack mode following the firing of FBI Director James Comey. Former Defense Secretary Bob Gates vigorously defended the president on the Comey matter on Face the Nation. He dismissed the obviously silly, conceited concerns concocted and created by the left over whether Mr. Trump asked Comey for a loyalty pledge.
I think in the context of senior government positions, I think an anecdote of what I told President-elect Obama when we had our first meeting. And I said, you don't know me. Can you trust me? Why do you think you can trust me? And so on. But at the end, I said, you can count on me to be loyal to you. I will not leak. I will keep my disagreements with you private, and if I cannot be loyal, I'll leave.
A lot of integrity in that man. John Dickerson was a little surprised. He even pressed Gates to join the puerile partisans who quiver at the simultaneous smiles on the faces of the president, the Russian foreign minister, and Russian ambassador in the Oval Office. Gates was having none of it. He brought Dickerson up smartly on the difference between hard-headed policy, consequences, and smiling countenances.
For a long time, Soviet foreign ministers would come in to see the president all the time, routinely. Jimmy Carter stopped that after the invasion of Afghanistan. Ronald Reagan resumed it in 1984, I think. And so the fact of a meeting like that, I think, is not that big a deal.
Not that big a deal. When have you last heard those words about anything President Trump does? Gates rejected outright Dickerson's overall characterization of the president as a, quote, unpredictable leader.
Broadly, philosophically, I'm in agreement with his disruptive approach. So in government, I'm a strong believer in the need for reform of government agencies and departments. They have gotten fat and sloppy, and they're not user-friendly. They are inefficient. They cost too much.
Quite an indictment of the status quo and the orthodox establishment, particularly in government. President Trump is smashing the status quo with his agenda that puts America first. Dickerson and Face the Nation folks must surely tonight still be in shock that somehow they found and then booked on their hyper-partisan show one of the establishment's stars whose integrity survived his lengthy and valuable public service. Our quotation of the evening, this from Ronald Reagan. The status quo, you know, is Latin for the mess we're in. We're coming right back. Well, the former President Barack Obama, who has accepted millions of dollars per speech, making the Clintons look pristine when it comes to the level of greed, accepted the JFK Profile and Courage Award. The former president declared in an interview that his decision not to follow his own red line and to refuse to bomb Syria after Assad used chemical weapons on his own people, quote, required the most political courage. The courage not to enforce his own red line, to follow through on his own threats. Never have we heard such self-accredited heroism about one's own passivity. Well, joining me now to discuss the former president's Syria claims, the cyber threat, much more, senior fellow with the London Center for Policy Research, Lieutenant Colonel Tony Shaffer.
Hey, hello.
Can you imagine a former president saying that he was, I don't know why we should be surprised. In that speech he was paid over $3 million for, he used the first person singular reference 216 times, and now he seems to award himself a Profile and Courage Award.
I think the courage is being completely separated from reality, Lou. I mean, let's look at this for what it is. The very policy he speaks of, we know now failed. So why on earth would you draw attention to a policy that you know, oh, we wanted to make some time to get the weapons out of there. It would have been one thing, Lou, if the weapons actually were removed, but we know they weren't. And worst of all, his administration knew that in the end. They just blew it off. More importantly, the failure to follow through with that threat, with that
had
policy,
its own consequences.
Had its own consequences. Look, I've talked to generals on both, who basically were ended up being politically drawn to both sides, and one of them is General Tony Zinni, who worked for President Clinton as his commander of Central Command. And General Zinni said, "You can never, as a president, draw that red line and not follow through, or else you will damage the prestige of that office, and more importantly, people will not take you seriously." And that's exactly what happened from that moment forward.
Well, let me just say that Tony Shaffer, the colonel's had a long experience in cyber warfare.
Yes, sir.
That dates back decades, in point of fact. And what is your thinking when you think about the Obama administration, when the OPM, Office of Personnel Management in the federal government, was hacked by the Chinese, 30 million names and data files given up.
To include mine.
And then we were told that the next time it's going to be war. That was the clear implication. And now here we are in 2017 in May, watching 150 countries hit by a cyber attack. And we know full well the United States government doesn't have the capacity to respond or forestall or defend even its own assets.
Yeah, let's break this down. And yeah, my record was also compromised in that Chinese hack. And ironically, Lou, when you look at what happened during President Obama's watch, all these great technologies, and think about the billions of dollars that General Alexander received as the commander of Cyber Command and NSA, to actually do nothing with. Another thing I know for a fact, Lou, back when they had the first WikiLeaks leaks, when they were disclosed all the information, look, we knew where that information was. They chose to just let it get released anyway. It's insane that we build this technology and we don't do anything with it. So and by the way, the response to the Chinese hack, Lou, was a strongly worded memo to the Chinese saying, hey, don't do that again. So
akin to a strongly worded memo to follow, I believe.
Right. Yeah. So it's kind of like, why even have the capability if you choose not to use it?
Well, I'm not convinced that we've got the capability, because we're not defending and we are not retaliating. And I can only find one reason why that would occur, and that is because that we are woefully inadequate and unprepared as a result of the president who held office for the previous 8 years.
Well, I'll say this. We have the best and brightest people who have great ideas, but often those ideas are held back by the policy.
Well, nothing's holding them back now.
Right.
And Tony, I got to tell you, I think most Americans are sick and tired of watching us act like buffoons in the face of this kind of assault. And and the world is suffering as well, as you well know.
Oh, I agree. And
I've got to call it here, Tony. Sorry, we're way over.
Sure.
Come back soon. We'll continue the conversation. Lieutenant Colonel Tony Shaffer, always welcome on this broadcast. North Korea claiming it successfully tested a new medium-range ballistic missile capable of carrying a nuclear warhead. That is bad news. A preliminary assessment by the U.S. military says the KN-17 missile in the air for 30 minutes. It splashed down about 60 miles south of Russia's Vladivostok region, roughly 250 miles from Japan. And joining us now to assess the latest North Korean provocations, the potential of an electromagnetic pulse, or EMP, attack on this country. Joining us tonight, Dr. Peter Fry, the Executive Director of the Task Force on National and Homeland Security, the Chief of Staff of the Congressional EMP Commission, and it is great to have you with us, Peter. This is deeply alarming, because this now makes it pretty clear that North Korea is almost within reach of Japan, and perhaps as well, with some success, the United States itself, or at least some of our territories.
Thank you for having me, Lou. Yes, it does indicate that. Indeed, their current missiles can already reach Japan and South Korea. We talked last week about they can pose a satellite threat to the United States.
Are we absolutely convinced that they are working toward an EMP attack? How certain are you? We talked last time about 2 satellites held by North Korea that have been put up by North Korea that are going around the globe at the perfect altitude to carry out an EMP attack. How certain are you? What is your level of confidence?
Well, the EMP Commission has high confidence that this is part of the North Korean game plan. In addition to this most recent test, which, by the way, it was launched on a trajectory consistent with practicing for EMP, because this missile was not launched for range. It was launched for altitude.
Right.
So an EMP attack, you can
about
burst
1,300 miles. I mean, it was quite a high trajectory.
That's correct. The reason you do that is to gain altitude, so the EMP field can be as big as possible on the ground. And the last missile test that they did prior to this one, the Japanese and South Korean military both described it as practicing for an EMP attack because it was burst on ascent deliberately by the North Koreans when it was at an altitude of about 71 kilometers.
We know that the United States basically is unprepared. Civilian America certainly is basically unprepared for an EMP attack. What would be the result in, say, New York City, Chicago?
Not just in New York, but across the country. Potentially, an EMP attack with a single warhead could shut down the electric grid across the entire country and cause a protracted blackout lasting months or years. Cars would be paralyzed. Airplanes could fall out of the sky. You'd have natural gas pipeline explosions, nuclear reactor overloads. And worst of all, if you had a protracted blackout, it would be a serious threat to the survival of the American people. We only have enough food to feed people in this country for 30 days.
No, but I was taking New York or Chicago particularly as an example of the big cities across the country that would be absolutely devastated because there's very little in the way of stored food and resources. It would be an even worse disaster in the cities than it would be arguably in the suburbs and the rural areas. We're about out of time. I've got to ask you this. What are we going to do about your confidence and that of your commission in the fact that the North Koreans are prepared for an EMP attack?
Well, President Trump has already taken one important step last week when he signed an executive order for cybersecurity, because EMP is related to cyber attacks. The North Koreans, Russians, and Chinese regard EMP attack as part of cyber warfare. They're closely related. We hope that the president will next sign the Congressional EMP Commission's draft executive order to protect the country from EMP, an executive order which the Obama administration refused to sign for 8 years.
Dr. Peter Pry, thanks for being with us. We appreciate it, as always, as we continue our conversation and learn more from you about the EMP threat from, in addition to all the other threats, from North Korea. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Up next, the new Miss USA ignited a firestorm of outrage from the left. You know, the left, outrage, synonymous. Really? I mean, it really is. Left is always outraged. She dared to express conservative points of view. We take that up with Katie Freitas and Mike Gallagher here next. Stay with us. In our online poll, we ask you, do you believe the national left-wing media will ever stop its campaign of disinformation against President Trump? 96% of you say no, they won't, unless they have to. Conservative, that is, if the markets work their will. Conservative comments by the newly crowned Miss USA sparking a firestorm from the just manufactured outrage of the left. Kara McCullough, a D.C. scientist who works for the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission, is the new Miss USA, and she drew criticism because she expressed her views on health care during the pageant last night.
Do you think affordable health care for all U.S. citizens is a right or a privilege, and why?
I'm definitely going to say it's a privilege. As a government employee, I am granted health care, and I see firsthand that for one, to have health care, you need to have jobs.
Joining us now to discuss the left-wing attacks on the new Miss USA and Democrats' latest efforts to obstruct the president and his agenda, Olympic media managing editor of the Daily Caller, Katie Freitas. Good to have you with us. Mike Gallagher, host of the Mike Gallagher radio show on the Salem Radio Network. Good to have you with us, Mike. Let's start with Miss USA. I mean, she says it's a privilege, and the left has a meltdown. Katie, that's kind of fun to see a scientist engaging all of the rather primitive left.
It's appalling, honestly, is the only word that you can stick on this. It basically shows, if you want to know what liberals really think of the minorities that they say that they're trying to protect, look at what they said about her. She's black, she's an immigrant, she works for government, she's a scientist. And they said, essentially on Twitter, that she was disqualified from being black because she thinks that people shouldn't rely on the government for health care, that health care is a privilege, that jobs are a bad thing. It was outrageous, the hate people directed upon her. Instead of celebrating a minority winning Miss USA, they hated her because they didn't prescribe to liberal beliefs.
But, Lou, if you don't mind, I'm going to look at the glass as half full because I'm stunned that she won the thing. I mean, it's unbelievable that the organizers allowed it to proceed and gave her the victory.
You're talking about being a conservative rather than a reference to being a minority.
To be Miss USA. I mean, for this woman to even be allowed to by now you'd think there'd be calls from the left, not only as Katie said, to take away her ability to be black, to take the crown from her, you know, somehow dismantle her and say that you're no longer qualified to be Miss USA. But what a story she has, as you say, Katie, and an amazing achievement that this lady this young woman is representing the United States with such a remarkable story. It shouldn't be a big surprise. I mean, listen, it's kind of interesting to see the left take a couple of minutes away from trying to stop President Trump and now try to stop Miss USA. I mean, you know, just another shiny object.
Let's get them back on point then, because the Dems, Schumer crying Chuck, saying he's going to, in the party, the Dems are going to stop the FBI director if they don't get their way, irrespective of the national security, irrespective of the national interest. Katie, Schumer has lost his mind, hasn't he?
Well, that's the only thing he can do. He has no real power right now in the Senate, so all he can do is kick and scream. But honestly, I find it kind of funny that they say that they won't consider anyone for the FBI until they have a special prosecutor, as if that stops the Senate from vetting a potential FBI director to the full extent that it can. You'd think that they'd want to get someone in there as soon as possible, and yet they're just going to sit here and cry.
Yeah. You want to see a fascinating answer, Lou? You should, look at Senator Schumer's answer to the question, is President Trump somehow guilty of obstruction of justice? Now, James Comey decided that Hillary Clinton was not criminally liable under the Espionage Act because of her lack of intent. There's no such consideration ever given to Donald Trump when it comes to intent. Look at this story today and the way it's blowing up. No mention about intent whatsoever in his conversation with the Russians. It's just he must be trying to, to subvert the country.
And his top officials in the Oval Office saying absolutely the Washington Post is full of it, that the story is utter fake news, as the president has labeled it. I mean, I don't understand, Katie, how the Post can, frankly, they're just abhorrent in their lack of ethics, their standards. What have they become?
Well, I'm just going to say, look, if you're quoting sources that weren't even in the room, that may not fully understand the various levels of security classification, and you're seconded by BuzzFeed, what does that tell people? And the problem is you can't take that back. Once it's out there, you can't convince all of these people that you've whipped into a hysteria over this, that maybe it wasn't true.
Katie, thanks so much. Mike, thank you both. Appreciate it. That's it for us tonight. Thanks for being with us. Congressman Ron Estes, Kimberly Guilfoyle, Matt Slapp.